Hello, I'm going to talk to you this morning about the deerskin trade here in Alabama among the Creek people, and the other fur trade somewhat, but the main thing was the deerskin trade. When the first Europeans started coming in, traders, they were very interested in furs, but primarily deerskins. These deerskins were very popular in Europe. And these European traders brought in all sorts of manufactured goods, which the Creek people were very interested in, and they used the deerskins to buy these manufactured goods. Some examples: steel tools. These were extremely popular with the Creek men. Among the women, the iron pots and the copper kettles were especially popular because they were so lightweight and could easily be transported. This is a copper kettle. It's an exact replica of one that's at Colonial Williamsburg. The neat thing about this is lined with tin. People don't realize this, but tin is the original Teflon. Nothing sticks to it. You can cook grits in that pot, and when they're done and you pour them out, you just wipe it with your hand. It comes perfectly clean. Wool trade blankets were exceptionally popular with the Creek people, and a lot of the European traders brought these in. They also brought just plain wool yarn. The Creek women and some of the men were very skilled at weaving bags and baskets like the ones hanging back there. But this European trade was the whole economy here 250 years ago. And deerskins went out of here to Europe by the thousands, and lots of trade goods came in. Now, we probably in our history lessons have heard about the Red Sticks among the Creeks. The Red Sticks were a faction that were opposed to Creek people adopting all of these European items. They thought it was detrimental to the culture, and the Red Stick Rebellion was all about that. Okay, some of the fur animals that I have back here. Back here on the back rack, I have a couple of mink, a coyote, and a buffalo. Most people don't realize we had buffalo in Alabama, but up on into the early 1700s we did. Never had the vast herds like you saw on the plains, but we did have buffalo here. Down here on this rack, I have an otter, a small beaver, a bobcat, and a raccoon. The beaver, the otter, and the mink are water animals. And the neat thing about these furs, they have an underlayer of hair that is so thick that water doesn't penetrate it, because these animals live in the water and they need that. The coyote is a very luxurious fur. Very nice fur. And my favorite one is the bobcat. It's a beautiful little fur animal. Okay, when we get to the deerskins, deerskin does not make a good fur. On a deer, every hair on his body is hollow, and that's his insulation. And that hair is brittle and it wants to fall out. Now, you can have a deer skin with the hair still on it, and it's pretty, but you wouldn't make any clothing out of that deer skin with the hair on it. You want the hair off. You want to tan it to make it nice and soft. Okay, let's go through that process, which, when it's done the traditional way, is very labor intensive. takes many hours to accomplish it with one hide. The first step is to take the hide off the deer. And then the flesh side, that's the other side, this underside here, has to be totally cleaned. Every little speck of flesh and membrane has to come off of that. In the old days, this would be scraped with a sharp rock. You could lay it down on the ground and scrape it and scrape that flesh off of that membrane. Even something as simple as a deer leg bone that's cut at an angle to make like a little chisel. You work that hide and scrape that flesh off with that. I normally put one over a log that's at an angle, and I use a draw knife. You don't want it very sharp, but you want to hold that hide and you push it on that log and take that meat and membrane off of it. But that hide has to be totally and completely cleaned on that flesh side. Now once it's cleaned and it dries in that frame, then it's okay like that. It won't rot. That hide right there, I've been using it like this for several years. But if I'm going to make, and by the way, going to Europe, that's how it went. The flesh was totally cleaned and it was dried in the frame, and then the hide would be folded and 4 or 5 hides stacked up one on top of the other. That was called a bale of hides, and that's the way the European traders wanted them. And they went to Europe that way, and they tanned them and did whatever they wanted to over there. If the hide had been thoroughly tanned here in the traditional way, they would have been much more expensive. And I'm not sure if any European traders ever wanted any of those. They may have, but mostly they took them just like that, but folded up, like I said, in the form of a bale. Okay, now let's say that I want to make leather out of that. Deerskin, as I said, is not a good fur, but it's a beautiful leather, some of the finest leather you can have. But that hide has got to be tanned. Now here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take some kind of scraper. This is the one I use. And in that frame, and I'm going to start basically shaving it. I'm going to go up and down, and I'm going to take every bit of the hair and the epidermis that's under the hair, take it off. I can also soak that hide in water, in a pot of water, make the epidermis swell, and then I can throw it over my fleshing beam, and I can use my draw knife and scrape the hair and epidermis off, just like I might have done the flesh side. When I get totally through with that and have that hide totally clean, both sides, this is what it looks like. A lot of folks, when they look at this, say, oh, that looks like paper. Yeah, it does, kinda. This is what we call rawhide. Rawhide is very strong, it's very tough, and even this has some uses. Now, you wouldn't try to make any clothing out of that. But it does have a lot of uses. For example, I can take a piece of that rawhide and cut it into strips like this. I take one of these strips, and if I soak it in water, it gets very pliable and limp, and it stretches. Then if I want to tie something with it, I just tie it with that wet rawhide, and as it dries, it shrinks and grips. Now my Hive Scraper here, I made this probably 6 or 7 years ago. There's absolutely nothing holding that blade but that rawhide that was wet, wrapped around there tight and tied, and as it dried, it just gripped like steel bands. The only way to get that off without cutting the rawhide is to soak it in water until I can get those knots out, and then I can take it. But there's no screw or anything holding that. It's just right up against that wood and wrapped with that rawhide, and it's there good and tight. I've used that thing a lot, and it's still just as tight as it was the day I made it. Another little interesting thing, this surprises a lot of people. One of the toughest hides is a squirrel hide. Now it's so small, it's a little harder to do this, but that squirrel skin can be cut into strips. This is actually stronger than the deer skin. This was actually used some cases for bowstrings. The best hide of all, I don't have an example, but the best hide of all to make cordage out of is groundhog skin. Okay. Now I'm ready to tan that deer skin after I've got it totally clean, and I've got it down to this stage right here. I'm going to take some kind of big pot, and I'm going to put about a gallon of warm water in there, and I'm going to take the brain out of the deer's skull. There's an old saying that every animal has enough brain to tan its own hide. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't done it with every animal, but a deer brain will tan a deer hide. I'm going to put that brain down in that water, mash it up, stir it up. It'll look like you have to be careful. You don't want somebody to get too excited, because when you get it all stirred up and everything, it looks just like strawberry milkshake. I'm going to take that hide and I'm going to put it down in that pot. And I'm going to stir it around, work it around, get that worked in there into that hide as good as I can. And then I'm going to take it and wring it out. I'm going to wrap it around a tree and twist it and twist it and twist it. And I'm going to try to get every possible ounce of water out of there that I can. The reason is, the next step is the most critical. It has to be done right, or you just ruin the hide, or you have to start over. And it's the most labor-intensive step. At this point, I'm going to take that hide and I lace it back in the frame. There are other ways to do it, but I like to do it in the frame. Brace that frame real good, preferably up against a wall or something so I can turn the frame around easy, because I want to do both sides. And then, you know, today would be a perfect day to do it. It's comfortable out here, and it's low humidity. The hide will dry a lot faster. I've got my paddle here, and then I've got to brace that hide, that frame, and I've got to start rubbing that hide hard. I put all my weight into it. I'll go from one side to the other, from the top all the way to the bottom, up and down, back and forth, every inch of that hide. I'll turn it around at some point and do a little bit on the other side. In doing this process, it's okay to take a little break, go get a drink of water, but we're talking 4 or 5 minutes, not 20 minutes or 30 minutes. That hide cannot hang there and air dry like clothes on a clothesline. You have got to rub it hard and stretch it non-stop until it's totally dry. And on a low humidity day like today, that would take 5 to 6 hours to get it dry. If you let it hang there and air dry like the clothes on the clothesline, it goes right back to this. But when it's done properly, we call this breaking the hide. You're stretching the fibers of the hide and separating them. When I do it in that frame, I'll have to go around and tighten the laces about every 20 minutes because the hide is just stretching and it's sagging. It's not nice and tight like it is on there now. But I've got to rub it and rub it and rub it. And when I get through, if it's done properly, it ends up like this. Now you see the difference. This rawhide, and this is like velvet cloth. It's very soft, it's very durable, it's very comfortable to wear. You know, my leggings that I have on are brain tan deerskin. One example I use, this stuff, it's amazing. There are no chemicals in the tanning process. It's all natural. And the leather breathes. So you might think of wearing leather that's hot. This stuff is not. It breathes. And the example I always use, on a cold day, this is warmer than jeans. But on a hot day, it's cooler than jeans. You know, you're not going to get hot in these until it's probably 85 degrees or more. And in cold weather, you're not going to get cold in them. The best thing about them is so tough. Now, if I'm going to go hunting and I need to run through a briar patch, I can do it. My legs are not going to get scratched in this deerskin. It's just extremely comfortable to wear. Other things can be made from the deerskin. My hunting bag here, and this is not a purse, ladies, it's a hunting bag. It's made from the deerskin. Of course, my leggings. You could make any item of clothing out of it that you wanted to. But you notice also there's a color difference. There's one more step. And this isn't a hard step at all, but it is critical. This one, if it got wet, it would go right back to rawhide. But what we have to do is somehow close it up like a tube. Normally fold it and sew it together down through there and make like a big tube. Then that's hung up. When I do one, I also sew a cloth skirt to the bottom of it just to keep the hide itself more away from the heat. Now I'm going to take that hide and I'm going to hang it up. I'm going to build a little fire and let it burn down to coals. You can use rotten wood. I prefer green cedar leaves. I just go find a cedar tree and take some of the limbs off of it, small limbs. And then I put that cedar right down on top of those hot coals, and that skirt that comes down off of this thing, I pull it out around the fire, the hot coals, and it makes lots of thick smoke. And having it sewn together into a tube like that, and then that skirt on the bottom of it, the hide is up high, it's way away from the heat, but the smoke is all forced right up in there. There's something in the smoke. Some people say creosote is produced by the smoke, but some chemical in the smoke penetrates that hide, and it does not make it waterproof, but it protects the tan from getting wet. If like I said, if this gets wet, it has to be reworked. It'll go back to rawhide. But if my leggings or this bag get wet, doesn't hurt it at all. I've had some people tell me that you can actually take brain tan leather and wash it in the washing machine. It doesn't hurt it. I've never done that, but I don't know. After it's smoked, it looks like this. Actually, this is a scrap from the hide that I made this bag from. This is fully tanned and it's complete and it's ready to use. Naturally, like with so many things, the most critical step in the whole tanning process is also the hardest. And if there's a lot of humidity in the air, it can take, I've spent as long as 8 hours working on one to get it dry. But it's well worth the effort. You have the finest leather that's available to anybody. It's very comfortable to wear, very useful for lots of things. And that's how the Creek people here and other Indian people across this land tanned and prepared their hides to use them for clothing, for other items. The fur animals, you can do the same way, but you only put the brain mixture on the flesh sides. You don't put it on the hair side. And I have a little item, it's like a post. Actually, take a post and bevel the end of it like this and put it in the ground, and then you work that flesh side back and forth over it like that to soften it. The deer was so useful. Of course, the meat is excellent to eat. You know, all the wild game, like the buffalo, wild game, buffalo, raccoon, possum, any of them, deer of course, there's no cholesterol in that meat. And a lot of heart doctors will tell their patients, I know my brother-in-law was told this by his doctor, you can only eat beef and pork combined 3 times a week. But deer meat, you can eat it every day. No cholesterol whatsoever. What the Creek people did here in the southeast, because they lived in permanent villages, they weren't nomadic like the Plains Indians. They lived in permanent villages, generally along a creek or river bottom. They were big farmers, excellent farmers, and they grew huge fields of crops, primarily beans, corn, and squash. Now, when the nutritionists tell us we take beans, corn, and squash, we have a perfect balance. And then, of course, they had a lot of wild game meat that they ate. We know from documentation that the first Europeans found the native people here in the southeast to be healthier than they were. The men tended to be bigger, they tended to be stronger. And a lot of it was their lifestyle, living out here like this all the time and hunting and working those fields. I have a bow back here that's a traditional Creek bow, and mine is not all that powerful, but what would happen, a boy, now the girls worked with their mothers and their aunts, and they learned household duties and so forth. They also learned, and in a Creek village, the fields, the crops belonged to the women. The houses belonged to the women. The society was matrilineal. Everything was traced through the mother's line. And a little boy would be given an item called a blowgun. This is a piece of river cane hollowed out, and then the darts, and the real hunting darts were made from pieces of hickory about 18 inches long. This is thistle that's put on here to give it its wind breakage behind the blow of it. And then little boys were given these, and they had to get out and practice regular. They had to become proficient with this. Sometimes it'll stick. as soon as the boy became proficient with that, he was given his first bow. And he had to get out and practice with that and shoot it every day. As he grew and developed, he became stronger and he would be given a more powerful bow. And we know that then those Creek boys, as they grew into manhood, when they got up 18, 19, 20 years old, they were shooting bows that were well over 100 pounds draw strength. Very, very powerful. We know from Spanish documents, when the first conquistadors came through here, they could not shoot the Indian bows. They were too powerful for them. They couldn't pull them. And they found out the hard way that those bows were very effective. I've got a steel point on this one. This was a trade point. But the favored material for making arrows was the native river cane. It's used for everything. The Spanish found out the hard way when they first started, like the De Soto expedition that came up through Florida and into Georgia and Alabama. They were wearing chain mail. They thought this was protection against arrows. But the Creeks, the people at that time, figured it out pretty quick. They would take the points off the arrow. And then when that arrow hit that chain mail, it splintered like that and went right through it. They had some very severe wounds from that. But a cane arrow is very, very effective. To get in a good fight, this is a traditional Creek war club. It's called, a lot of people call them red sticks after the red stick difficulties. This one is made from maple. It's very heavy. This is exactly like what was used in battles here, like out at Horseshoe Bend Park. And this thing being swung by an adult man, it's going to break bones everywhere it hits. These were extremely effective and were a common weapon. And then of course from the traders, the people got steel axe heads, hatchet heads, and your typical tomahawk. This is one of my favorite things, and actually I've heard, I haven't seen it, but I've heard over in Mississippi the Choctaw kids still do this. These are called rabbit sticks, and little kids were given these at an early age and told to practice with them, and they go out through the woods and through the fields and they jump a rabbit. You throw them sideways like this so that it spins, and I've had people say, oh, I don't think I could hit a rabbit with one of those. You don't have to. There are 50 other kids out there with you. They all throwing at that one poor rabbit. And one of them's going to get him. But these were very commonly used. These are hickory. They're very heavy. And you throw one and it'll bring down a rabbit, okay? I have down here on the ground some deer antlers. They were used for all sorts of tools. The points on the end were even used for arrow points in some cases. This is called sinew. It comes from the deer. There's strips of this down his back, down his legs, and so forth. And Mike can see how when you pound on this, it starts separating into tiny threads. This is used for sewing. It's used for tying an arrow point to an arrow. Used for all sorts of things. It's very, very strong. One thing that's neat about this, you take some, you're going to tie a point to an arrow. Soak it in water. wrap it on there. As it dries, it makes its own glue. You don't even have to tie it. It makes its own glue, and it sticks to the arrow and holds it. This is a creek hunting camp. The men would go away from the village in the fall just to hunt. They would set up temporary camps like this. Some of the women would go too, and they would live like this for 3 months. And during the height of the deerskin trade, all they were doing was hunting deer every day in and day out, bringing them in, taking the hides off. The women were scraping them and processing them, getting ready to trade to the European traders that came in. One other little thing that is interesting, we've all heard the expression, how much did you pay for that? $5, $6. That term used in the word buck to refer to a dollar comes from the deerskin trade, because the man might be looking at that iron pot, tell the trader, my wife wants that pot, how much? And the trader might say, $5 skins. And so later that kind of changed over to, they were saying just $5. Comes directly from the deerskin trade. Okay, I don't think there's anything else that I can talk about out here today. I'll emphasize once again the importance of the deerskin trade here in the Southeast. It was the entire economy, the whole economy here 250 years ago was based on deerskins. It also led to the decimation of the deer population. Now, I can remember as a child right here in Coosa County where driving down the road now, you got to watch out or you'll hit one. They're everywhere. But I can remember as a child, there were no deer at all in this part of Alabama. And that's because they were literally all killed out as a result of the deerskin trade. And that deerskin trade and the interaction with the Europeans was very detrimental to Creek culture, and in a lot of ways contributed to the collapse of that culture at that time. And I mentioned the Red Stick movement, which was a direct rebellion by some against all of this trade and all of this trade and becoming too dependent on these European trade items. All right, I hope that you all have learned something from this. I hope to see you in person at some of the events that I do at various places. And I appreciate your attention and appreciate you listening, and hope to see you in the future. Thank you very much.